Hello everyone, welcome back to Reading for the Generations. I hope you're all having a lovely springtime. There is a new book tag out in the world and I felt like sharing with you my answers today. I just wanted to show you what the quintessential spring day is like here in the Pacific Northwest. I treasure it. I'm a Pacific Northwest girl. I grew up along the coast where there's even more storms, even more rain. It's actually more of a slanted kind of rain. We don't really get those here. And also, this is an original book tag by Daniela from The Uncommon Reader and Reney at Beyond Books. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, number 1. Spring Chicks. Name a book that made you feel warm and fuzzy. I have 2 for this prompt. The first one is a picture book, In the Garden with Flory, written and illustrated by Sonia Danowski, translated from German by Marshall Yarbrough. And this is just a really sweet story about Lynn, who is probably 7 or 8, and when she finds out that her grandfather is in the hospital, she volunteers to take care of his garden flowers. And she has a puppy named Flory who helps her water all his plants while he's recovering in the hospital. And he's a very mischievous pup. And with the help of Lynn's friend Emmy and her mom, they have to problem solve and find a solution when when things don't go as planned. Another book that I found very heartwarming is a Lois Lowry book called Tree Table Book, and this is a story about 2 Sophies who are best friends. One is an 11-year-old girl and the other is her 78-year-old neighbor, Mrs. Sophie Gershowitz. And young Sophie struggles to accept that Mrs. Gershowitz has an ailing memory, and she has to take a cognitive memory test to see whether she needs to move into an assisted living facility. And so young Sophie, to prevent her from having to move away, she strikes up this plan to have Mrs. Gershowitz try to memorize 3 words by associating them with the story. So the 3 words are tree, table, and book. And as you read, you get to know more about Mrs. Gershowitz's life story, things that she's kept hidden from her own family, and I just found that there were so many truths in this little book, and I absolutely adore it. The next prompt is April Showers, a book that is set near, in, or on the water. I have one of my all-time favorite books, Lilani and the Distant Sea by Erin and Trotta Kelly. Fantastical coming-of-age epic story that revolves around Filipino mythology and folklore. Here's the map. There's an Eva Ibbotson story called Island of the Ants, A-U-N-T-S, and this is a fun one about 3 sisters, Auntie Etta, Auntie Myrtle, and Auntie Coral, who've inherited this magical island that they all grew up on, and it has to remain a secret, the location and name of this island, because for all their lives they've taken care of these magical sea creatures and see animals that have been wounded in some way. And so since they don't have any children of their own, and they're coming to the realization that they too are getting along in age and are becoming a little bit more limited in what they're able to do on the island, they go about kidnapping children that they feel have nurturing and caring hearts. And of course, with it being if it's a novel, things go ornery and not as expected, and it just comedy ensues. I love this book. And the next question is, spring break. Talk about a time you took a break from reading and why. Well, there really haven't been that many instances. They weren't, I guess for reading for pleasure, the only real time I've had to take time away from that is when I was working full-time and then was also a full-time student. I just wouldn't have much brain power at the end of the day to really read for myself. That's usually what I do. Most of my reading happens at night. But once those finals and exams were through, I would, immediately be reaching for a favorite book of mine to reread. The next question is Swallow's Homecoming. Name a book or an author you always go back to for comfort. Alright, so this one would be a rumor gotten book called An Episode of Sparrows. This tells the story of a little girl named Lovejoy. It's, I can't remember if it's during or after World War II, but resources are scarce, and she comes across a little packet of blue cornflower seeds, and she wants nothing more than a little patch of earth so she can plant them. And it's just a delightful story. I think I've never seen this mentioned here, An Episode of Sparrows, but if you are a fan of The Secret Garden, you should give this one a try. It's just absolutely beautiful. I do tend to reread it every spring, and in autumn I always plant out some blue cornflowers for Lovejoy. The next question is Blooms. Name a book that started slowly but blossomed to be one of your favorite reads. So I have two for this one. Marjorie Sharp is one of my all-time favorite authors. She wrote The Rescuers, and she also wrote adult novels. I think her most famous one is probably Clooney Brown. I read one of her lesser-known novels called The Innocents, and this was strikingly different from all her other books that I've read of hers, in that it's very, you follow an unnamed narrator who is a middle-aged single woman. She's living her best life in pre-war England out in the country, and an acquaintance from her early young adulthood really comes back to England with her husband and her toddler-aged daughter, Antoinette. Antoinette is her name. And they basically leave Antoinette in her care before she realizes really what's happening. They promise her that they are going to come back from their travels to Europe to pick her up. But slowly you come to realize as the years pass that they're really, and the war of course prevents the parents from coming back to get her. But it's a very quiet novel about just this special bond that forms between this little girl as she becomes a small child. I think she's 7 by the end of the novel, and I really loved her protagonist in this. I loved being in her head and seeing the world through her lens. And then a more recent read was one by T. Kingfisher, who has become one of my new favorite authors. I read her newest one last year, A Sorceress Comes to Call, and this one also was extremely different from the other more lighthearted, funny, fantastical books that I've read of hers. This one is, well, I don't want to give too much away, but it is a coming-of-age tale, and it's a bit of everything. There's mystery, there's a little bit of romance, there's suspense, and even horror. I was shocked as to how much I enjoyed this one because I very rarely ever read that genre. And then the next prompt is Eggs in a Basket. Name 3 books you want to read this spring. So, alright, the first one that I'm really anticipating is Erin Entrada Kelly's newest release, called At Last She Stood, and this tells the true story of Josefina Guerrera, who was a Filipina spy during the Second World War. And I would also love to read Diane Setterfield's novel, The 13th Tale. I really fell in love with her style of writing over the winter with Once Upon a River. And then there is a Eva Ibbotson novel called Medensky Square that is set in the springtime in Vienna just before World War II, and I've read every Ibbotson novel except for this one, so I'm really anticipating this one too. And then the next prompt is Green Pastures. Name a classic that never gets old. Well, there's too many for this one. The first one that comes to mind is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. There's also anything by Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters. One that I've never seen mentioned is E. Nesbit novel. It was actually her final novel that she ever wrote, and perhaps one of the most autobiographical ones, called The Lark. And this, we follow 2 cousins who have basically grown up as orphans. They get kicked out of boarding school after finding out that their family solicitor has squandered their livelihoods, and so they have to become businesswomen, and one of their business ventures is selling flowers that grow around their little home. I actually do have this one. Isn't this beautiful? Yeah, I really highly recommend reading this, and it would make a lovely Mother's Day gift too. The next prompt is pollen. Name a book or author you're allergic to. There is one author, I've read their short fiction and really have enjoyed a couple, and that's Stephen King. I just don't read horror, and it's just too much for my central nervous system. But I've enjoyed, the Rita Hayworth short story, and the one that Stand By Me is based off on. I think it's called The Body. But yeah, I just can't do his horror fiction. And then there is a bonus prompt called Equinox. Find 2 books on your shelf that have the same exact number of pages. So I have this one called Heat and Dust by Ruth Crower Jabwala, and this won the Booker Prize in 1975. I have not read it yet. It's one of my oldest ever books I've had on my bookshelves. I bought this my first time ever going to Powell's Books when I was still in high school. But this one, as far as I know, it's a dual perspective story where you follow a young woman in the 70s who is looking into her family tree, and then we also go back in time to the 1920s where we meet this young woman's great aunt, and yeah, it just sounds like it's a book about family history and how stories get altered and changed as they pass down the generations. And yeah, this has, forgot to tell you how many pages. It has 181 pages. And then the other book that I found that had also 181 pages is one by Shakespeare, King Lear. I unfortunately have never read this tragedy. I don't know if I have it in me these days to read it. Maybe this year I'll be brave enough to read this, because this is one of his most famous works. So we'll have to see. Those are my answers to The Spring is in the Air book tag. I'd love to hear what your answers to these questions are. And if you're watching and you have your own channel, this is your invitation to do the book tag. And thanks so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful week ahead, and I'll see you next week. Take good care. Bye-bye.